How would the red-hot core behave? He asked rhetorically. Will we manage to hold it suspended, or will it go down into the earth? No one ever in the world ever found himself in such a situation before. Yevgeny Velikov for Pravda newspaper, quoted by Los Angeles Times, May the 14th, 1986. Today we continue the subject from the last week. We want to debunk some myths around the Chernobyl divers. Despite their undisputed bravery, there is quite a lot of misinformation, and we want to make their story known as it was, without any exaggeration or underestimation. At the end of the video I will have some news about Chernobylite too, this time for real. So, not to keep you waiting any longer. Let's start. Chernobyl Divers Part 2. It was May 6th, 1986. Just before one of the entrances to the partially collapsed Unit 4 building, there was a small gathering. Military men, some of the commanders, and 3 power plant workers: Alexei Ananenko, Valery Bespalov, and Boris Baranov. They were plant mechanical engineers at the time, and their mission was to prevent an event that could destroy the whole of Europe. As you pointed out in the comments under the last video, the chance was small. There were even newer calculations and experiments, and some of them tried to prove that this event was either very improbable or completely impossible to occur. Yet, remember the disaster they were facing at the moment. The biggest nuclear accident ever made by human civilization. The time was not in their favor. They missed a lot of resources, and they couldn't yet grasp the overall scale of the whole incident. The fear was clear. The blown reactor revealed a lot of things that should not have contact with, for example, air, water, or steam. At first, all they did was secure the other reactors. 3 out of 4 were still working several hundred meters away at the farthest. They didn't have time or knowledge, especially the one we have now, to be sure what to do next. Neither the scale of the situation, nor the overall USSR's political and economic atmosphere at the moment were helping them. They had to deal with all the problems at once, but often they had to approach them one by one. They didn't have any guidelines, because nobody had to deal with such an event ever before. This is a scandalous simplification, but I need to point out what we can call a hindsight bias. If you don't know what it is, this can be called a psychological effect of knowing the course of events after they already happened. When we know that, we often can find ourselves overconfident and believe, facing the same events, we could easily predict what will happen before it has happened. There is a good example of that from the time of the disaster. On May 14th, 8 days after the divers were sent on their mission, the Los Angeles Times quoted a physicist interviewed by the communist newspaper Pravda. How would the red-hot core behave? He asked rhetorically. Will we manage to hold it suspended, or will it go down into the earth? No one ever in the world ever found himself in such a situation before. I think that it may be one of the reasons a lot of people are underestimating the Chernobyl disaster and even some of the events that happened during it, like the possible explosion of the filled water tanks, which were sitting below the destroyed reactor. Now we know that it was probably a minor obstacle, and possibly it would not have happened even if no one drained the tanks. But, in my opinion, questioning the possibility of them exploding is still, well, questionable. Why? Because I think the risk was significant and the probability was high enough to act quickly. Anyhow, let's stop with the what ifs here. We can always talk in the comments. Right now, it will be good to continue where we left the last time. when the three divers entered the building. As I said before, here is where the myth starts. Well, at least most of them, as we will leave the most irrational ones out. Even the particular chronology of events was doubted for decades. Thankfully, with the internet and the freedom of speech, we can now inspect the divers' mission more closely than before. Let's look into the myth step by step, invoking the most popular parts. The first and most well-known is the name of their team. Our heroic divers were not actually swimming. The story differs from source to source, but overall they all agree that the water in the corridors was no higher than up to the knee, so about 50 centimeters. Yet their gear might have added a bit to this name. As a matter of fact, they were wearing wetsuits with additional protective equipment. The author of Chernobyl 01-2340 insists that the basement was indeed flooded with water, yet before the divers went there, the firefighters already pumped as much of it as they could. It was he who said that the water reached the knee level. Also, they were not the first people, nor power plant workers who entered Unit 4 corridors below the reactor hull. Others had already been there, to measure the radiation levels for example. No sources say who they were though. Another writer, Adam Higginbottom, the author of Midnight in Chernobyl, said that Ananenko, Bespalov and Baranov entered the basement only after other engineers already got there. He invoked Piotr Zborowski and his subordinates drained the flooded area beneath the reactor hull. They opened other valves. This cleared most of the water from the corridors. Of course, no one questions the bravery of the three divers. Other people's deeds don't make their sacrifice less important. All the sources agree on also one more thing. Finding the right valves was almost a miracle. So we can also agree that they were indeed the only people who were familiar with the corridors enough to get this done. The corridors were a maze of pipework, cables, technical lights, valves and other equipment or machinery. Finding the right valves was like finding a needle in a stack of hay. Despite that, Ananenko, Bespalov and Baranov have found that needle. Before the reactor and all its content melted through the ceiling of the corridors and the water tanks. So, if we take the most well-known popular version of the Chernobyl events, the HBO Chernobyl TV series, we can see that they did a pretty good job picturing the corridors, yet they over-dramatized the situation. At least a bit. Another myth was also debunked years ago, even in the HBO TV show mentioned before. The divers did not succumb to the radiation sickness shortly after their heroic mission. Actually, as far as we know, at least one of them is still alive and well. Alexei Ananenko gave a lot of interviews a few years back. A lot of them were published, for example, in English, American and Polish newspapers, also online. What's interesting about this myth is that on May the 14th, 1986, 8 days after they went into the Unit 4 building, Los Angeles Times wrote based on Pravda and other USSR's newspapers that the bigger danger was averted. Despite they wrote about the divers, nowhere did they name Ananenko, Bespalov or Baranov. The newspaper Soviet Russia said Yevgeny Ignatenko, deputy director of the National Nuclear Energy Agency, volunteered with 4 other specialists to dive into the tank with special scuba apparatus in an attempt to drain the water. They accomplished their mission, Ignatenko told the paper, although he received dozens of Röntgen of radiation, a dose that is more than double the limit for a nuclear plant worker for an entire year. Nothing special about this, the paper quoted him as saying, "We have people who have more radiation than that." Los Angeles Times, 14th May, 1986. As we may see, there is a lot of contradictory information. The name, the number of people, the place, corridor and water tank, and the actual diving with scuba gear. Also, the only Evgeny Ignatenko, or Yevgeny depending on the Latin alphabet writing, I found who was related in any way to Chernobyl disaster was the deputy director of Minatom, the USSR's National Nuclear Energy Agency. Don't mix him up with Vasily Ignatenko, the firefighter from Pripyat and one of the first victims of the disaster. Several years later, the New Scientist newspaper invoked his name as the person who was contacting the International Atomic Energy Agency regarding another accident at a nuclear power station. Regarding the chaos during the time of the Chernobyl disaster, it's entirely possible that somebody mixed up some names. Or, given the USSR's priorities regarding international politics, somebody in Pravda or other newspapers quoted a person who was never on the site of the disaster, just for the USSR to look better. What do you think? Was it done on purpose, or is it us who just don't know a few other important names of the liquidators? Write to me in the comments section if you have any information on that. Anyway, it's time to end this episode. We'll get back with the subject also next Sunday, when you will hear the first-hand experience memories given by one of the divers himself. And if you haven't heard yet, we have just announced Chernobylite's complete edition. It will arrive on PC and consoles before the end of second quarter this year. It will include all the DLCs we've published so far, and if you already have the game with what we may call a season pass, you will get the free upgrade. Also, the consoles will finally get all the content too. Sorry for the long wait. We had some troubles down the road and maybe we will be able to tell you more about it someday. But that's it for today, guys. Take care, stay safe, and see you next week.